What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a talk show set and refuses to play by the rules? When a simple interview about his latest project turns into a battle of principles that nobody saw coming. Today, we're breaking down the moment Kevin Costner's appearance on The View went completely off the rails. And trust me, you need to hear how this unfolded. But before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me whose side you're on after hearing this whole story, because this one divided the internet. So Kevin Costner walks onto The View set to what seems like a standard welcome. The audience is clapping, the hosts are smiling, and he's there to talk about his new Western series that he's been pouring his heart and soul into. He sits down, exchanges pleasantries with Whoopi, waves to the crowd, and everything seems perfectly normal. Joy Behar jumps right in with the first question. "Kevin, welcome back," Joy says with that signature smile. "So, you've spent how much of your own money on this Western project?" The rumors are saying it's somewhere in the hundreds of millions. Kevin nods, clearly comfortable with the question. "Well, Joy, I don't usually talk specific numbers, but yes, I've invested significantly in this. When you believe in something, when you believe in telling stories that matter, you put your money where your mouth is. This isn't just a vanity project. It's about preserving a part of American storytelling that's being lost." Joy leans forward, and there's something in her expression that shifts slightly. "But Kevin, and I mean this respectfully, are Westerns really what audiences want right now? We're living in a modern world with modern problems. Don't you think that's a lot of money to spend on looking backward?" The audience murmurs a bit, and you can see Kevin's jaw tighten just slightly. Looking backward, he repeats slowly. "Joy, with all due respect, understanding where we came from isn't looking backward. It's understanding the foundation of who we are. These stories, the Western frontier, the values of self-reliance and integrity, those things are timeless." Sonny Holston chimes in, trying to keep things diplomatic. "I think what Joy might be asking is, how do you make that relevant to younger audiences who might not connect with that era?" But Joy isn't letting it go. "No, Sonny. What I'm asking is whether we should be romanticizing an era that frankly had a lot of problematic elements. The treatment of Native Americans, the glorification of gun violence, the very masculine, very white perspective of history." The studio gets noticeably quieter. Kevin sits back in his chair, and you can see him taking a measured breath. "Joy, my films have always tried to show the complexity of that time. Dances with Wolves wasn't exactly glossing over the treatment of Native peoples. I've spent my career trying to tell honest stories, not propaganda pieces. But you're still making Westerns, Kevin." Joy pushes back. "At a certain point, isn't that just nostalgia for a time that frankly wasn't great for a lot of people?" Whoopi tries to step in. "I think we can acknowledge that Kevin's work has been thoughtful about these issues." Kevin holds up a hand. "No, Whoopi. It's okay. I want to address this." He turns to look directly at Joy. "You know what I find interesting, Joy? You're questioning my choice to tell stories about American history, about the frontier, about the struggles and triumphs of that era. But every story doesn't have to be a political statement about the current moment. Sometimes a story is just a story, and it can contain truth and beauty and tragedy all at once without being an endorsement of everything that happened." Joy crosses her arms. "But you're choosing what to show and what not to show, Kevin. That's the point. You're making choices about what to emphasize." "Of course I am," Kevin replies, his voice getting a bit more intense. "Every filmmaker makes choices. Every storyteller decides what story to tell. But I refuse to apologize for finding value in stories about courage, about survival, about people building something in harsh circumstances. Those are human stories, Joy. They transcend politics." Sarah Haynes tries to redirect. "Kevin, tell us about the cast. You've got some amazing actors involved." But Joy isn't finished. "I just think, Kevin, that with all the resources you have, all the influence you have in Hollywood, you could be telling more relevant stories. Stories about what's happening now, stories about the issues we're facing today." Kevin's expression hardens. "And who decides what's relevant?" "Joy. You, the studio executives, Twitter. I make films about what I think matters, what I think has value. And I'm not going to apologize for believing that stories about human nature, about character, about principle, those things matter regardless of what decade they're set in." The tension in the studio is palpable. Now, the other hosts are exchanging glances. The audience is silent, and Joy is staring at Kevin with an expression that suggests this conversation is far from over. Human nature, character, principle. Joy says, her tone shifting to something more pointed. Those are nice words, Kevin. But let's be honest about what Westerns really celebrate. They celebrate a kind of rugged individualism that frankly is part of what's wrong with this country right now. This idea that everyone should just take care of themselves, that we don't need community, that we don't need to think about the collective good. Kevin S eyes narrow. That is not what my films are about, Joy. And I think you know that, don't they though? Joy presses. The lone hero. The man who doesn't need anybody who solves problems with a gun. Now you're being reductive and you're being unfair, Kevin says, his voice rising slightly. Have you actually watched my work, or are you just operating off of stereotypes about a genre? The audience gasps audibly. This is not how interviews on The View usually go. Whoopi is about to intervene when Joy fires back. I've seen your work, Kevin, and yes, it's well made, but that doesn't mean I can't question the underlying values. Question all you want, Kevin says, leaning forward now. But don't sit there and tell me that stories about honor and sacrifice and doing the right thing even when it's hard. Don't pretend those are somehow toxic values. That's insulting. Joy doesn't back down. I'm not saying honor and sacrifice are toxic. Kevin, I'm saying the framework you're putting them in, this Western mythology, it comes with baggage. And maybe instead of defending it, you should acknowledge that. Acknowledge what exactly? Kevin asks, his voice controlled but clearly frustrated, that I should be ashamed of making films about American history, that I should apologize for thinking there's something worth exploring in how this country was built with all its flaws and all its promise. There you go again, Joyce says, gesturing with her hands. American history, how this country was built, Kevin, for millions of people. How this country was built meant genocide, meant slavery, meant exploitation. So yes, maybe you should think about that when you're spending a fortune glorifying the frontier. Kevin S face flushes. I have thought about it, Joy. I've thought about it deeply. That's why I made Dances with Wolves. That's why I've tried to show native perspectives. That's why my characters aren't perfect heroes. They're complicated people making difficult choices in impossible situations. But you seem to want me to just stop telling these stories altogether because they make you uncomfortable. Alyssa Farah Griffin tries to moderate. I think there's maybe a middle ground here where we can appreciate historical storytelling while also being critical consumers. But Joy is locked in now. Kevin, let me ask you something. When you're making these Westerns, these stories about the frontier, who's your audience? Who are you making them for? Kevin looks at her incredulously. I'm making them for anyone who wants to see them. I'm making them for people who appreciate good storytelling, good cinematography, good acting. I'm not making them for a demographic, Joy. But they appeal to a certain demographic, don't they? Joy continues. Older, mostly white, mostly conservative audiences who want to go back to a simpler time that never actually existed. The audience reacts audibly to this. Some gasps, some murmurs of agreement, some sounds of disagreement. Kevin stares at Joy for a long moment before responding. That is incredibly condescending, Kevin says quietly. But there's steel in his voice. You're basically saying that anyone who enjoys Westerns must be some kind of nostalgic conservative who can't deal with the modern world. You're putting millions of people into a box based on their taste in films. And you're doing it to make a political point. I'm making an observation, Kevin, Joy replies. And I think it's a fair one. It's not fair. It's lazy, Kevin shoots back. It's lazy thinking. You're taking a genre that has told countless different kinds of stories, that has evolved over decades, that has been used by filmmakers to explore everything from racism to corporate greed to environmental destruction. And you're reducing it to a political stereotype. That's not analysis, Joy. That's just bias. Joy's expression hardens. Bias? I'm biased for pointing out that Westerns traditionally center white male perspectives. You're biased for assuming that's all they can be. Kevin responds immediately. You're biased for deciding that stories about resilience and frontier life have no value because they don't fit your political worldview. And frankly, Joy, I think you're being intellectually dishonest right now. The studio goes completely silent. Whoopi's eyes widen. The other hosts look shocked. Joy's mouth opens slightly, clearly taken aback, intellectually dishonest. Joy repeats, her voice rising. Kevin, I'm asking you legitimate questions about the choices you make as a filmmaker. No, you're not, Kevin interrupts. You're not asking questions. You're making accusations wrapped up as questions. There's a difference. You've decided that what I do is problematic, and now you're just trying to get me to admit it. But I'm not going to because I don't believe it. Sonny jumps in. Kevin, I think Joy is trying to have a conversation about representation and whose stories get told in Hollywood. Then let's have that conversation, Kevin says, turning to Sunny. Let's talk about it honestly. Yes, historically Hollywood has marginalized a lot of voices. Yes, we need more diverse stories and diverse storytellers. I absolutely agree with that. But that doesn't mean the solution is to stop telling certain kinds of stories or to demonize filmmakers who work in traditional genres. You expand the conversation. You don't shut parts of it down. Joy leans forward again. But Kevin, when you have limited resources, limited screens, limited attention, and you're choosing to make another Western, you are making a choice about what gets space and what doesn't. Joy, I'm financing this myself, Kevin says, exasperation creeping into his voice. I'm not taking resources from anyone. I'm not preventing anyone else from making their films. I'm using my own money to tell a story I believe in. How is that taking anything away from anybody? Because you have influence. Joy argues. You have power in Hollywood. And when someone like you makes Westerns, it signals to the industry that this is what's valuable. This is what's worth investing in. It perpetuates a cycle. Kevin shakes his head firmly. That is such a cynical way to look at art. Joy. By that logic, no one should ever make anything in a traditional genre. No one should make detective stories or war films or romance or science fiction because it might signal the wrong thing to the industry. That's absurd. It's not absurd. It's reality. Joy counters. The entertainment industry is not a level playing field, Kevin. You know that. Of course I know that. Kevin replies, his frustration now fully visible. But the answer isn't to make me feel guilty for making the films I want to make. The answer is to support more filmmakers from more backgrounds telling more stories. But you're not interested in that solution, are you? You just want to criticize what I do. Joy's voice gets louder. I'm criticizing the choices you make. Yes, because I think they matter. Because I think when someone with your platform chooses to spend hundreds of millions on Westerns instead of something more relevant, more urgent, more connected to the actual problems we're facing, that's worth questioning. More relevant to who? Kevin demands. More relevant to you, more relevant to your politics. Joy, not everything has to be about the crisis of the moment. Sometimes people need stories that take them somewhere else, that remind them of timeless values, that show them something beautiful or tragic or meaningful that isn't just about today's headlines. That's escapism, Joy says dismissively. It's art, Kevin fires back. And you're sitting here telling me that the only art worth making is art that serves your political agenda. That's not criticism. Joy. That's propaganda. The word hangs in the air like a bomb. The audience erupts in a mix of reactions. Some applause, some gasps, some shouts. The other hosts are all talking at once, trying to regain control. Whoopi is holding up her hands, calling for calm, but Joy and Kevin are staring at each other across the table, neither one backing down. Joy's face is flushed now, and she's clearly angry. Propaganda? You're calling me a propagandist because I'm questioning your choices. I'm calling it what it is, Kevin says, not backing down an inch. You're saying that art is only valuable if it serves a specific political purpose, if it advances a certain agenda. That's the definition of propaganda, Joy. Real art asks questions. It explores human nature. It shows us things about ourselves. It doesn't just tell us what to think. And your Westerns do that. Joy challenges, her voice dripping with skepticism. Your stories about cowboys and shootouts and the good old days. Those are asking deep questions. Kevin's eyes flash. Yes, they are. They're asking questions about justice, about morality, about what people are willing to sacrifice for what they believe in. They're asking whether civilization and wilderness can coexist, whether progress requires destroying what came before, whether individuals can maintain their integrity in corrupt systems. Just because those questions are asked through the lens of a Western doesn't make them less profound. But they're not the questions we need to be asking right now, Joy insists. According to who? Kevin demands, his voice rising again. According to you, you don't get to decide what questions are worth asking, Joy. You don't get to be the arbiter of what stories matter. That's the whole point of artistic freedom. Whoopi tries again to intervene. Okay, I think we need to take a breath here. But Joy isn't done. Kevin, let me be very clear. I think you're a talented filmmaker. I think you've made some important films, but I also think you're being defensive right now instead of listening to legitimate criticism about the genre you work in and the messages it sends. I'm being defensive? Kevin asks, incredulous. Joy, you've spent the last 15 minutes attacking my work, my choices, my values, and you're surprised I'm defending myself. You invited me here to talk about my project, and instead you've turned this into an interrogation about whether I have the right to make the films I want to make. That's not what I did. Joy protests. That's exactly what you did. Kevin counters from the moment I sat down. You've been trying to get me to apologize for making Westerns. You've suggested my work is irrelevant, that it appeals to the wrong people, that it takes resources from more worthy projects, that it perpetuates harmful values. At what point were you planning to actually ask me about the story I'm trying to tell? Sarah tries to redirect one more time. Kevin, why don't you tell us what this new project is actually about? What's the story? Kevin takes a breath, seeming to consider whether to let it go and pivot to the project. But then he looks back at Joy and continues. You know what, Sarah? I appreciate that, but I think Joy and I need to finish this conversation because there's something important here. Joy, do you believe in artistic freedom or not? Joy looks surprised by the direct question. Of course, I believe in artistic freedom. Then why are you sitting here telling me what I should and shouldn't make? Kevin presses. Why are you suggesting that my choices are wrong? That I should be making different films? That the stories I want to tell don't have value? That's not criticism, Joy. That's censorship dressed up as social consciousness. It is not censorship to critique someone's work, Joy says firmly. You're right. It's not, Kevin agrees. But there's a difference between critiquing the work and questioning whether it should exist at all. You've crossed that line. You're not saying my Westerns could be better or more nuanced. You're saying I shouldn't be making them in the first place. You're saying the genre itself is suspect, that the values it explores are problematic, that the audience that enjoys them is backwards. That's not film criticism, Joy. That's cultural gatekeeping. The audience is completely riveted now. You can hear a pin drop between the exchanges. The other hosts have essentially given up trying to moderate and are just watching this unfold. Joy takes a different approach, her voice calmer but no less pointed. Kevin, I'm going to ask you one more time. Don't you think given everything happening in the world, given all the division and the problems we're facing, that you have a responsibility to use your platform for stories that bring people together rather than stories that celebrate a mythologized past? Kevin stares at her for a long moment before responding. Joy, my responsibility as a filmmaker is to tell stories that are true to my vision, that have artistic integrity, that say something meaningful about the human experience. My responsibility is not to make propaganda films that advance your political agenda or anyone else's. If my Westerns bring people together because they see something universal in them, great. If they don't appeal to you, that's fine too. But I will not apologize for making art that I believe in just because it doesn't fit your narrow definition of what's acceptable. Narrow. Joy's voice rises again. You're calling my perspective narrow. Yes, I am. Kevin says bluntly. You're saying that unless art serves a specific contemporary political purpose, it's not valuable. That's an incredibly narrow view of what art can be and what it can do. Art isn't just about the moment we're living in. Joy. It's about eternal themes, timeless questions. It's about beauty and truth and the complexity of human nature. And those things don't expire just because the setting is historical. Joy shakes her head. We're just going to have to agree to disagree on this, Kevin. No, Joy. I don't think we are, Kevin says. And there's finality in his voice. Because this isn't really about Westerns at all, is it? This is about whether artists are free to create what they want or whether they have to submit their work for approval to people like you who think they know better. And I'm telling you right now, I will never submit my work for that kind of approval. I'll make the films I want to make tell. The stories I want to tell. And if you don't like them, don't watch them. But you don't get to tell me I'm wrong for making them. The studio is electric with tension. Whoopi finally steps in with authority. Okay, we need to go to commercial. Kevin, thank you for being here. But Kevin stands up, removing his microphone. Actually, Whoopi, I think I'm done here. Joy, I came here in good faith to talk about a project I care deeply about. Instead, you decided to put me on trial for my artistic choices. I don't need that. And frankly, your audience doesn't need to watch this kind of ambush masquerading as an interview. Joy stands as well. Kevin, if you can't handle tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing press. Kevin turns to look at her one last time. Tough questions are fine, Joy. I've answered tough questions my entire career. But what you did today wasn't journalism. It wasn't critique. It was an attempt to shame me for not making the art you think I should make. And I don't accept that. Not from you. Not from anyone. He walks off the set as the audience erupts in a cacophony of reactions. Some are cheering, some are booing. Everyone is talking at once. The camera catches Joy standing at the table, her expression a mix of anger and shock. The other hosts are looking at each other, clearly unsure how to proceed. Whoopi is trying to restore order, but it's chaos. And that's how one of Hollywood's biggest stars walked off the View in the middle of what was supposed to be a simple promotional interview. No one could have predicted that a conversation about Westerns would turn into a full-scale battle over artistic freedom, political correctness, and who gets to decide what stories are worth telling. So, what do you think? Was Kevin right to defend his artistic choices so aggressively, or did Joy have a point about representation and responsibility? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed because we'll be covering more explosive celebrity moments just like this one. Let me know in the comments. Should filmmakers be held accountable for the messages in their work, or should artists have complete freedom to create whatever they want?